I was noticing all this hate on China. Where was it coming from? I couldn't understand. Why did everybody all of a sudden decide something was wrong with China? And I noticed that it was the same story across every platform, exactly the same story. I was like, oh, this sounds like what happened before the war in Iraq. It's just propaganda, and it's being fed to every newspaper to create hate and fear and distrust. And obviously it's, yes, here we are, we're getting ready to go to war on China. The US was driving a war on China. The first casualties had already happened, and they were Asian Americans. Wars cost the United States a lot. In the last 20 years, it's cost US taxpayers $21 trillion. And we needed that $21 trillion to take care of the needs of the people in the US. If your value is in weapons instead of peace and cooperation, that's going to infect the very fabric of your country.
Even though the US government and the military-industrial complex continuously fueling the China threat, there are American people who are fighting against this fear-mongering. On February 28th, the U.S. House Select Committee on the Strategic Competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party held a hearing titled Chinese Communist Party's Threat to America. During the hearing, a woman stood up holding a sign that says, "China is not our enemy."
And perhaps most important, the committee can help determine the combinations of policies
There will be order.
and legislation necessary to counter CCP aggression and rebuild America's and the free world's competitive advantages.
Joe McMaster, why don't you pause for a second? You'll be given additional time, and we'll take care of this.
Surrounding China with more than Philippines, the people of Guam and Hawaii, their people.
She disrupted the hearing with her clear message: American people need cooperation, not competition with China. After she was dragged out of the hearing, a DC resident goes by Hector M. also disrupted the hearing and shouted, calling the committee out.
This committee, as I was saying, can help the United States.
It's about saber rattling. It's not about peace. We need cooperation.
Your sign is upside down.
It's the biggest threat to this country and the world. We need to address that with China.
Both of them were arrested.
We're being arrested right now for free speech. We demand committees on peace and justice, not for war-mongering. If we cared about human rights, we wouldn't have Guantanamo Bay. It's still in existence.
The woman who disrupted that hearing is CODEPINK organizer Olivia DiNucci. That was her second time disrupting such an event. On February 16th, she disrupted an event organized by the Heritage Foundation featuring Senator Josh Hawley.
And what do our leadership?
We have the largest military in the world. We spend over $1 trillion every year. And the state, your state of Missouri, is over half of people are in poverty. China is not our enemy. The climate crisis is. We need to be this serious about the climate crisis.
During that event, Senator Hawley was making his case why the U.S. need to stop funding a proxy war in Ukraine so they could start a full-on war with China. So DiNucci stood up, disrupted that event, and shouted, "China is not our enemy. Climate crisis is." To understand why these brave women are doing this, today I'm very honored that I invited one of the co-founders of CODEPINK and the creator of China is not our enemy campaign, Jodie Evans. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Jodie, let me ask you the first question. Why you gals want to start this campaign and sending a message that China is not your enemy?
Olivia has done a very brave thing. And as an anti-war organization that is now 20 years old, it was maybe 3 years ago, I was noticing all this hate on China. Where was it coming from? I couldn't understand. Why did everybody all of a sudden decide something was wrong with China? And I noticed that it was the same story across every platform, exactly the same story. I was like, oh, this sounds like what happened before the war in Iraq. It's just propaganda, and it's being fed to every newspaper to create hate and fear and distrust. And obviously it's, yes, here we are, we're getting ready to go to war on China, because why would all these lies and hate be being spread? Because they're spread on purpose, to drive people away from a country, to make them hate it, and therefore then to be used as tools to drive to war. And so we created China is not our enemy, to confront what was happening. And over the last 3 years, we've been doing webinars and education about, what is China really? Because Americans are pretty naive about what China is really, and have very backward ideas about China, and they're very a little xenophobic about the Chinese, and the hate being driven is not helping. One of the first things that became obvious was, if the US was driving a war on China, the first casualties had already happened, and they were Asian Americans. And so, the second sign that was held at this hearing yesterday said, "Stop Asian hate." And we were able to push back and actually quiet a lot of the hate that was happening, because became Asians that were saying, you're driving hate, and we are on the front lines of that battle. And then you're watching professors be attacked, TikTok attacked in universities. It's getting very silly. And of course, the most ridiculous thing was the spy balloon. And so it's very sad and almost tragic to watch the extent to which they're going to build this case of hate and fear towards China. And so our only chance as peace activists, because the media won't talk about what we do, they refuse to talk about peace, is to disrupt where that's happening. And so Olivia disrupted the hearing. And, it's always a very hard thing to do, because you're risking arrest, and you are also risking all the attacks that come from disrupting a hearing. And she was super nervous, but felt really good in the end about what she did. She was, like you said, we need hearings that are hearings about how do we get to peace and how do we cooperate, not hearings about more war. Because wars cost the United States a lot. In the last 20 years, it's cost US taxpayers $21 trillion. And we needed that $21 trillion to take care of the needs of the people in the US. And most major cities, we see unhoused people on the streets. We've got young people burdened with college debt, the needs of the people for better education, healthcare, housing, all those needs are present. And instead, $21 trillion was spent on weapons and destruction of the earth. And one of our other messages is the war is not green. So here you have a lot of people talking about climate change and how serious it is. But if you're investing in war, you're investing in more destruction of the planet and greater effects on climate change.
I noticed there's a bombardment of reports of coverage describing how dangerous China is, how dangerous the China threat is to American people.
They called it an existential threat. I wanted to have them pull a dictionary out, and do they understand what that means? Existential threat? It means an immediate threat to your life. That's the same kind of lie they used with Iraq. Weapons of mass destruction. It was going to be a mushroom cloud. I mean, the fear-mongering that is really like what our name was created from. Bush was frightening the American people with these color-coded alerts, orange, red, and yellow. He was frightening them to war. And so we called CODEPINK for peace. This is the same ridiculous story. Existential threat. China has no foreign bases surrounding the United States, but the United States has 250 bases surrounding China. And not only that, but they're violating the human rights of the people who live in the islands around China, where they're building more bases and more missile launching pads. And they're not only violating the human rights of the people and the sacred rights of where their families have been buried over generations, but they're destroying pristine ecosystems with these weapon systems. So existential threat, I think it's kind of, we have a saying in the United States, the pot calling the kettle black. It's, or, you're pointing one finger and four fingers pointing back at you. There's nothing like an existential threat. And this is like the day after China offers a peace plan, a very serious, thoughtful, and appreciated peace plan by people around the world. And unfortunately, not by Biden, who also had something very derogatory to say that didn't make any sense. He said it was irrational when it was probably the most rational thing we've seen around the Ukraine war. So it's ridiculous to be calling China an existential threat, and part of when it's very clear that it's manipulation and warmongering.
First, I don't know whether you saw it, the reports on CNN, and how the reporter was on a U.S. spy plane. The U.S. spy plane was flying over South China Sea, and they're saying, "Look, the China's pilots are flying their jet plane so close to us." So, but even in their reports, I mean, their U.S. planes are 8,300 miles away from their own borders, flying over South China Sea, and they're saying, "Look, the Chinese planes are so aggressive." And second, and I just posted on my Twitter as well. It's the recent comment on a webinar. The comment is coming from the U.S. ambassador to China, Nicholas Burns. So during the webinar, he said, China needs to realize that the United States gonna stay in this region. He means Asia. United States gonna stay in this region, and we are the leader in this region. I mean, this is Asia. Why you want China to realize that U.S. is the leader and gonna stay in Asia? So I mean, they don't even realize what their comments sounds like to people in China or in the whole global South who have been the colonies for hundreds of years. And you're talking like a Western hegemon. You don't even realize what's wrong with your thinking, with your mindset, and that's dangerous.
Well, that's U.S. hubris. I mean, that's how dumb they are inside the Beltway. They believe that. And, actually, that if you look at what they're doing it because they believe they're the lords of the earth, that. And I was trying to describe that to a taxi driver when I said, this isn't good. We don't want a unipolar world. That is not democracy. That is not good for the planet. That's not good for the people. We don't want that. He said, yeah, don't people watch Star Wars? Don't they know that empires are stupid? And I was like, yeah, this one's really stupid.
Recently, I think we see this escalation of tensions, the deteriorating relations between China and the United States. And of course, and at the same time, the average Americans are suffering from lack of resources, lack of medical cares. For example, the recent Ohio train derailment. If the government could use the money to build their infrastructure like China did, or like many developing nations who joined the Belt and Road did, that would benefit the American people. And so, they are just sending those monies to wars. So now investing that money in some meaningful things. I'm wondering, as a peace activist, as your organization, what kind of message you want to say to the warmongers?
You sound like me, actually. That's what we do all day, is that, cut the Pentagon. It's 65% of people's tax dollars are spent to destroy the planet and create really the shredding of the fabric of society. And most of that shredding is happening in the United States because that money is going out of the country and it's not being invested in the people. So yes, we have a whole campaign to cut the Pentagon and a whole campaign to talk about the costs of war. Our media is not allowed to talk about the costs of war. It's not allowed to expose the costs of war. It doesn't listen to women from war zones and tell their stories about the devastation of what the United States has done to their countries. I mean, we don't hear, what we've done to Afghanistan or Iraq. Oh, or how about the fact that we have sanctions on Syria that just had a tragic earthquake and people can't get aid, or that we've totally decimated the entire middle class of Iran with sanctions, or starving people in Cuba to death. It's none of that gets told. The people in America don't hear that in the media, and they don't know what's happening in their name and with their money. But it's the destruction that's happening outside of the country is also happening inside the country. Not only that, but what was interesting is when the day that Biden said he was sending weapons to support Ukraine, the next week there were mass shootings, like 5 of them, one after another. And so if your value is in weapons instead of peace and cooperation, that's going to infect the very fabric of your country. And it does affect the literal fabric of the society of the United States. Unfortunately, they don't take responsibility for it, and they aren't changing their behavior around it. And yes, the infrastructure is falling apart. But more I worry about the personal relationships, the care for each other, that, all this propaganda, it deadens in a way, and it also distorts our feelings. And by doing that, it allows this propaganda to hook into empathy and compassion and literally be weaponized as a tool for war. And that's on purpose. So it's also really disgusting that the people in charge of the United States would use its people in this way to weaponize them as tools for war on another country, on innocent people. And I'm a peace activist because there's nothing more horrific than war. And I know China knows that. I know there's many people still alive that suffered so much, and China lost so many people. So, yeah, we need to love each other and care for each other. And that's what we do our work for. It's for peace and love. And people laugh at that. But unfortunately, it's not a joke. It's how we all survive.
Thank you, Jodie. Thank you for your work and your organization's work. Thank you for fighting against this fear-mongering about China. We really appreciate it here. We heard your message. Your videos have been shared on China's social networks widely. So there are people seeing that, and they know the difference between American people and the American government. So thank you so much. I'm looking forward to meet you in person in May in Beijing.
Yes, the same. I can't wait.